to Iraq today on American Thanksgiving Day. They went to Baghdad to rally the troops, and they could hardly believe their eyes. Well, Julian Mannion is in Baghdad tonight. Julian, what happened?
Well, this turned out to be an extraordinary gesture in an extraordinary conflict. For days now, there have been routine preparations for a Thanksgiving dinner at the President's Ranch in Crawford, Texas, and equally what seemed to be routine preparations for a Thanksgiving dinner here at Baghdad Airport for troops from the 1st Armored Division and the 82nd Airborne Division, about 550 of them. And this was to be addressed by the head of the US Coalition Provisional Authority, Ambassador Paul Bremer.
Julian, I'm afraid that we actually lost the sound on that. That was Paul Bremer, I think, introducing the President. We didn't actually get it. But can you perhaps tell us, though, how much of a risk was the President taking in actually going out there?
I think I should first of all tell you what really happened if you missed the sound, which is simply that, as I say, it was supposed to be a relatively routine address by Paul Bremer, but what he actually said was that he was supposed to read out the President's proclamation, but what he would actually do is give way to the most senior person in the room, and then out of a side door, dressed in a military-style, Air Force-style short jacket, stepped the President of the United States himself in front of an absolutely stunned audience of, as I say, about 550 US soldiers, who then broke out into cheers and yells. As far as the risk is concerned, it existed. There was actually a near shoot-down of a DHL Airbus, that's the delivery service Airbus, on Saturday by a missile, and since then, civilian flights into this airport have ceased. But the President came in.
All right, Julian, thank you very much indeed, and we will try to bring you those pictures a little later in the programme.
Maxine Carr's police statement produced another dramatic revelation at the Old Bailey today. She told detectives Ian Huntley had once slapped her across the face during an argument. She said she couldn't remember what it was about, but when asked to describe what kind of things made him angry, she said, running out of muesli. Colin Baker is at the Old Bailey this evening. Colin.
Yes, Mark, you know we sit surrounded by Victorian panelling in this number 1 court, but today we hardly notice the sounds coming from the benches, the brush of pinstripe and silk on well-worn leather, or the odd creak of old oak. Instead, we listened as Maxine Carr's words just flowed from the prosecution benches about how she was asked why did Ian Huntley pick on these 2 girls, and how she denied that she had deliberately befriended Holly and Jessica. Inside the Old Bailey, below the dome and in wood panel seclusion in a corner off the Grand Hall, the Crown case is approaching its final stages, and Maxine Carr's words on the day she was arrested have taken most of today. Carr is accused of saying she was in the house with Ian Huntley in Soham on the Sunday night the girls were reported missing. The prosecution claims that she was actually in Grimsby with her mother that weekend. And so the court was told about a piece of paper detailing the alleged false alibi found in the house Maxine Carr shared with Ian Huntley. During the interview, she was asked who wrote it. Me, she said, on a piece of paper which was in the hi-fi cabinet. Asked why, she said, I wanted to make sure I'd got it right. She was then asked to read from the paper. The transcript records her reading 4:55 to 5 p.m, got in Bath approximately 5:40 to 5:45 p.m, dog home, approximately 6:15, girls, 6:25 p.m, came down and put tea on. The interview was with Detective Constable David York, who looked on from the witness box as the court heard he then asked Carr who had written the note, and she replied, Ian. Junior counsel for the prosecution, Christopher Bramwell, continued reading the transcript. Detective York asked, are you scared of Ian? Maxine Carr said, no. Has there ever been any violence in your relationship? Yes. Tell us about it. There was an argument, and eventually he slapped my face, and because of my bone structure, it bruised. He can't stand me banging on. What would normally cause him to argue? Running out of muesli. What does he do? He shouts and storms about. The court listened intently as Maxine Carr's interview transcripts touched on the couple's relationships with school students. At one stage, Detective York asks Carr if Huntley had ever expressed a sexual interest in children. Maxine Carr said, no. What about you? No. What do you think about me asking you that question? I think it's disgusting. In the interview, Carr also talked about how the media coverage of their arrests had made her feel worse. We've got to go on with our lives knowing that people think that is what we were arrested for. I will never ever set foot in Soham again. Well, the prosecution is now in its final stages of presenting its case. The defence could start as early as Monday. Back to the studio.
Colin Baker, thank you.
There was some positive news for Tony Blair on asylum seekers today. He claims to have fulfilled his promise to halve the number entering Britain within a year. Now, when Mr Blair made the promise last October, the monthly total of applicants was 8,770, an all-time high. Well, today, Downing Street announced that in September this year, that figure had fallen to 4,225. That's a drop of 52%. Even so, the Home Secretary David Blunkett has come in for harsh criticism over a raft of new hardline measures designed to reduce those numbers still further. Well, Glasgow is one city where tensions about the issue run high, and Martin Geisler is there. Martin.
Well, Mary, the lights you see behind me come from Glasgow's tough Sight Hill housing estate. It's home to thousands of people seeking asylum, and the situation here is perhaps a good illustration of the problem as a whole. Glasgow, as a city, agreed to take in 10,000 asylum seekers. So far, only 2,000 of those people have been granted refugee status. Julia is from Azerbaijan. She arrived in Glasgow 2 years ago, claiming she'd been beaten and tortured. She asked to stay in Britain, but was told no. The government says it's now found a simpler way to deal with such claims. When people like Julia arrive in the UK, they become asylum seekers. They'll be classed as one of the following. Someone who meets the strict legal guidelines becomes a genuine refugee and can stay. They may have been tortured or abused. Someone who can't be officially classed as a refugee but could face dangers at home can be given humanitarian protection status. Someone who it's thought could have safely stayed in their own country will be rejected and deported. Figures released today show the government has succeeded in its promise to reduce asylum claims by 50% in the past year. In that time, though, they've closed the camp at Songat, which was taking up to 400 refugees a day, many desperate to get into Britain. And there have been other changes. Benefits are no longer available to those who don't apply for asylum as soon as they arrive in the UK. The list of safe countries has been extended. It's much harder to apply from places on the so-called white list now, countries no longer deemed to be as dangerous as they were. And there are tougher measures to come. Some unsuccessful applicants who don't leave face having their children taken into care. Julia says that would leave her with one bleak option.
If you will separate me from children, what should I do? For me, it means death. For me, it means only one way. I should kill myself. How I can live without children?
But the government's response to that, if you have to leave, take your children with you.
I don't expect them to want their children to be destitute. And I'm hoping that that measure will encourage people, because this is what it's meant to be, an incentive for people, to take the assistance of voluntary free trip home and not put themselves in those circumstances.
Among these asylum seekers fleeing from the past, the talk now is of what the future holds for them and their families. Well, of course, while these plans have proved hugely controversial, they will also be applauded by many people across Britain. The government was, after all, acting in the face of widespread calls from the public to get tough on people seeking asylum. Mary.
OK, thanks for that, Martin.
Well, the doctor was back at Downing Street this afternoon for another check-up on the Prime Minister. Number 10 now insists he's fine after his bout of stomachache. They weren't so sure yesterday, though, when a hospital consultant was rushed right across London on the back of a motorbike after Mr Blair started feeling poorly. To Downing Street now, and our senior political correspondent John Ray. John.
Mark, the only discomfort in Downing Street is the pain felt by officials tonight that Mr Blair's health is again a topic of conversation. Beyond that, they won't confirm whether this was a suspected appendicitis or perhaps nothing more serious than indigestion. All that kind of detail remains a secret.
How are you feeling, Prime Minister?
What he wants to say is that's none of your business, but reluctantly he answered. I'm fine, he revealed, as his punishing schedule took him to Wales tonight. As one commentator quipped, this Prime Minister doesn't have time to be ill. He looked fine yesterday too, but just a few hours after taking on Michael Howard in the Commons.
A new driver, but the same old clacked-out Tory banger.
He suffered stomach pains severe enough for his doctor to be summoned to Downing Street. A second opinion was sought. On the back of a motorbike, a consultant surgeon was rushed to number